is, I wasn't in Plashov, but I'm going to tell you, as I said to you in bus number 1 this morning, I don't tell, you know, things in sequence. So this particular part of my experiences is the part where I arrived at a so-called labor camp from Majdanek, where I was one of 2 transports that came, and that actually people survived from Majdanek, because in Majdanek itself it's another story which I'm going to tell you when we are in Majdanek. So the camp that I came to in August of 1943 was called Skarżysko Kamienne, and it was supposed to be a work camp. This camp was made up, there were actually 3 camps, and they were situated in the forests near a city called Radom, not far from Radom. Many forests in that area, and the reason why these factories were in the forest, because they were actually established by the government of Poland. And the government of Poland established them in places which they can be camouflaged. They were factories making munitions for the army and for the marine, and that's why they were there. And when the Germans came over, they handed it over to a company called HASAG. HASAG stood for Heinz Schmidt Aktiengesellschaft. It was a company quoted on the German stock exchange, in which the shares were mainly owned by the Dresdner Bank, the Deutsche Bank, all the banks that exist to this day. They haven't disappeared. You know, they were the actual owners of this particular enterprise, and that enterprise had many labor camps in Poland and in Germany, and they made ammunition for the German army. So we arrived from Majdanek in cattle cars, not the way we came there to be murdered, but already much more in a comfortable situation. We were given the striped pajamas that we were wearing were taken off, and we were given ordinary clothes, not very nice clothes, but ordinary clothes and shoes, and the wooden clogs that, you know, were taken away from us. And when we arrived there, the first thing that hit me when we got into the camp was I saw people that were yellow. I mean, you also canaries, the yellow canaries. Now, there were, not all of them were, but a lot of the people, men and women, were completely yellow. Their faces were yellow, their clothing was yellow, their hands were yellow, their nails were yellow. And it was only later on that I learned that there were certain parts of that camp, you worked with mines for anti-ship mines, and those mines were made with a material with acid, which is called picric acid. In Polish, it was called pikryna. It was a chemical, and that chemical was called pikryna, picric acid. The Germans that worked there, who were in charge, and I'm talking about civilian Germans, I'm not talking about the SS guards or anybody else, they all wore protective clothing, like you see today firemen when they go to put out the fire, and, you know, not to inhale the smoke. They used to wear masks. So did the Polish workers. They wore protective clothing. They used to get special food, apparently they used to get special fat food, because that would protect their bodies from absorption of that particular. But the Jews who worked there, they were in rags, because once you got your clothes originally, the chances of you getting any other clothes was remote. So this is my introduction to this camp, where suddenly, out of the blue, I came to a working camp, and this is the picture that I saw, was these people yellow. And I was told very quickly that if you are going to be chosen to work in a commando, they used to call every work was a commando work. You know, the work groups were called commandos. And if you were chosen to work in this commando group, the chances that you're going to exist longer than 3 months are not great, because the picric acid would go inside, would affect your liver, affect your blood, and you would swell up and die. And this is exactly what used to happen. So this is the introduction. Fortunately for me, I was not assigned to work in one of these commandos. I was assigned to a commando that was just as dangerous, but to work with black powder. And the black powder meant that I went at 6 o'clock in the morning to a place called Strzelnica, where they used to actually also shoot people, but there were pegs, rows of pegs, and there was a lot of ammunition that the Germans, you know, when they conquered France and they conquered Poland and other munition that they couldn't use in their own rifles or their own guns. So we had to actually remove the black powder, which could be used again, and then we had to put the actual copper, no, not the bullet, the
Cartridge?
the what?
The cartridge?
The cartridge onto this little kind of hook, and then you went with a hammer and you kind of exploded the little explosive there, which used to set the actual powder alight, and you should shoot the bullet out. And this was very dangerous work because often bits of powder were actually stuck underneath, and if you struck it, it would explode in your face and you would get badly injured, and sometimes you could even get killed. But that was easy work compared to the work with a yellow vitrina. The conditions in that camp were as follows. We lived in barracks built on stilts, not like what you saw in Auschwitz. They were actually built on stilts, and there were bunks, three-tier bunks. There was straw, there were no blankets or anything like that, and we lived, each barrack held very large numbers. I can't swear to how many, whether it was 500 or 700 or 1,000, but I know we at night, if you had to turn over, everybody had to turn over, because it was you kind of slept very close one to each other.
Very close.
And our food rations were as follows. When you got up in the morning to go to work, you got kava. Kava means coffee, and the coffee was made with acorns or something similar. It was not real coffee, so you got this hot drink, and then you went to work, and that was at dawn. You then worked till lunchtime, whatever work you were supposed to work, and the work usually was very hard work, and then you were supposed to get soup. And I think I mentioned it before. So there was these huge, soup pots, enormous pots that people used to bring, and there was all kinds of things floating in them. And I don't even have to tell you what they were, but most of it was rotten stuff, that rotten pieces of flesh from horse flesh and cabbage, some potatoes, some peels, but it wasn't very. It wasn't real sustenance.